Hi, everybody. It's Suzanne Strempik-Shea here today to tell you a little bit about my newest book, Compositions. It is a memoir in 42 essays by one kid on her 8 years of Catholic school, handed in 60 years late, because that's the case. These are essays I wrote on those 8 years of Polish school, particularly Saints Peter and Paul School in Three Rivers, my home village, where I grew up, really ensconced in a Polish American community, church and school, clubs, activities, basically not really hanging around with people or kids who weren't Polish American until I entered the dreaded public high school, which the nuns had many warnings about. But this is more just set in those 8 years, told in the voice of who I was in those 8 years with the knowledge that I had in those 8 years. So I don't jump ahead to say, well, years later I'd figure out. You're basically following me through those 8 years as I pick up bits of knowledge about family, about community, about Poland, about church, about God, all these things. And you see kind of the arc of how I'm growing, how that knowledge is growing. And I'm hoping that you'll find them written with poignancy and humor and just fun to dip in and out of. So I'm also thrilled because Compositions is my first book in the last 12 years. It is also my 12th book. So those of you who have been so kindly in my corner along the many years since 1994 and Selling the Light of Heaven, you might be happy that there's something. People will run into me in the grocery and say, "Oh, you're still writing?" And, life gets in the way, and I'm really thrilled this is here. So I'm going to read a little bit to you, and then I'll say a little goodbye at the end. Anyways, this is from a chapter called Every Good Boy Does Fine. So I took 8 years of accordion lessons on Mrs. Dranka's sun porch at Lake Thompson in Palmer, Mass. And this is a chapter that talks about Polish that was the theme of our lives, that was the theme of our school, that was the theme of our church, but how we kids really didn't know a whole lot of Polish if it weren't praying or singing. So every good boy does fine. Speaking Polish was like a spy code. Certain people knew how to speak it, and if you didn't know how, you wouldn't know what they were up to. It was like the shorthand my mother knew from studying to be a secretary in college, where they taught her the little squiggles that meant words businessmen in offices said, and she was able to write them down just as fast as they talked. And at Christmas, she could write a list of all the presents I was going to get from her and my father and leave it right there on the table in front of me. And I couldn't begin to guess if it had any chance of getting the Johnny West Ranch house so that Johnny and Jane, who I already had, and their horses Thunderbolt and Flame, who I also already have, would have a place to live. My mother would do the same thing when she didn't want me to know anything, using the spy code of Polish when talking to my grandparents or my father or their friends right in front of me. Unless the words were something about Jesus riding into town on a donkey or dying on a cross to pay for the sins of all the rest of us who weren't even born yet and hadn't even had one chance to do a wrong thing, or unless they were about something else we might sing about in church, I'd be lost. Polish was like the music notes I learned to read on Mrs. Dranka's sun porch so I could press the right keys and buttons on my accordion. There were shortcuts to learning, like how it was good to remember that the 5 lines that held all the music notes in place had letters that spelled out the E, G, B, D, F. Easier to remember as every good boy does fine. Lots of my friends didn't play an accordion and knew nothing about this, about the dots or the good boys, but I did. Learning Polish was a lot harder than music, though. Big words, lots of syllables, and spellings that made no sense. And accent marks like a comma underneath or a line slanted through a letter that changed how it was supposed to sound. If you knew how to talk Polish, you could talk to others who knew it, but anybody else wouldn't be able to understand you. The nuns said that wherever in the world you lived, you had a language. And if you happened to live next to some other country, you might go over the line on your map and stand in a grocery store and not know how to ask for a can of beefaroni for lunch, because over the line on that map, people had another word for it. So that's just a little snippet from the book. I do want to say, though, if you're not Polish, if you don't know the words, if you don't know the songs or the prayers, you still will find something in here to pick up on, because it's a story of a community. It's a time capsule of how we grew up, and especially if you grew up in the 60s and early 70s like I was during those 8 years, you might be nodding along. I hope you will, and I hope you pick it up. So look for compositions. It will be out September 1st. And thank you especially to those who've been in my corner for so long. Do widzenia.